My mother-in-law looked me dead in the eyes across the dinner table and said, with a smile so calm it made my skin crawl, that I was the best mistake her son had ever made, and that mistakes have a way of correcting themselves. She said it quietly, like a woman who had already decided the outcome of something I did not yet know was happening. My husband sat 3 chairs away and said nothing. I was 22 years old, 8 months pregnant, and I had no idea that by the following Thursday, I would be sleeping in my car in a church parking lot with $43 and a duffel bag that held everything I had been allowed to take. 6 years later, I was sitting in my corner office on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Nashville when my assistant knocked and told me there was a woman downstairs who did not have an appointment. She said her name was Sandra Whitfield. She said she was my mother-in-law. I told my assistant to let her wait. I want to tell you how I got from that church parking lot to that office. I want to tell you about the $43 and what I built from it. But first you need to understand who Sandra Whitfield was, and what she did to me, and exactly how she did it so smoothly that it took me 2 years to understand the full shape of what had happened. I met my husband, Daniel, when I was 19. He was 24, working at his family's commercial landscaping company, which his mother ran with the kind of iron precision that made grown men apologize for the weather. Sandra Whitfield had built Whitfield Grounds from a 2-truck operation into a regional company with 18 crews and contracts across 4 counties in Middle Tennessee. She was 61 years old, the first time I met her. With silver hair she wore like a crown, and eyes that assessed everything in a room before she said a single word. Daniel was her only child. I understood later that this was important. He was not just her son. He was her plan. I grew up in Clarksville, 45 minutes north, in a house where money was a subject that made my father leave the room and my mother's voice go tight. We were not poor enough to qualify for much, and not stable enough to feel secure. I learned early that you either figured out how to make your own way, or you spent your life being grateful for whatever scraps someone else decided to hand you. I chose the first option. I worked through high school, saved aggressively, started community college at 18, with enough in my account to pay for a full year without asking anyone for anything. I was proud of that. Sandra noticed it the first time we met, and I thought she admired it. I understand now that she was cataloging it. A girl without family money, and without family connections, was a girl who could be moved. Daniel and I dated for almost 2 years before he proposed. They were good years. He was warm in the way that men raised by powerful women sometimes are genuinely kind. Attentive. A little conflict-averse in ways I told myself were charming rather than alarming. Sandra was cordial to me in those years. Not warm. Cordial. The way a person is cordial to a guest they expect to leave. When Daniel proposed, Sandra threw us an engagement party at the Whitfield family home out in Brentwood. 40 people. Catered. A tent in the backyard with string lights. She gave a toast that was technically about how happy she was, and actually about all the things Daniel had accomplished before he met me. I smiled the whole time. My own mother cried. My father shook Daniel's hand 3 times. The first sign I should have taken more seriously came 4 months before the wedding. Sandra called to discuss the venue, a decision I thought Daniel and I had already made, and mentioned casually that she had put a deposit down on a different location. When I said we had already chosen a place, she said she knew, but that she thought this other venue would photograph better. And she had already spoken to Daniel about it. I called Daniel immediately. He said his mother meant well. He said it would be easier to just go with what she had chosen. He said it was one venue. Not a big deal. I went with the venue she chose. It photographed beautifully. We got married in April. I was 21. Daniel was 26. We moved into a house in Hendersonville that Sandra helped us find, which meant she found it. We looked at it once. and Daniel said it was perfect. The house was 12 minutes from the Whitfield Company headquarters. I noticed this. I did not say anything about it. I found out I was pregnant 6 months after the wedding. Daniel was overjoyed. He called his mother before he called anyone else. I was still sitting on the bathroom floor holding the test when I heard him on the phone in the hallway. Voice bright and happy. Telling Sandra she was going to be a grandmother. Sandra's response, which I heard through the door. I was a pause, and then, we'll talk about what that means for the business timeline. I told myself I had misheard. I had not misheard. What followed was 8 months of Sandra remaking my life in her image, while I was too exhausted and too hopeful to fully resist. She chose my OB because she had a relationship with the practice. She organized my baby shower and invited her friends, who outnumbered mine 4-1. She came to every appointment that Daniel attended, standing slightly behind him, her hand sometimes on his shoulder, her eyes always moving. When I mentioned that I found her presence at the appointments a little much, Daniel said she was just excited. When I said I wanted to talk to the doctor privately, Sandra said she could wait in the hall, and then somehow ended up inside the room anyway. And I was too pregnant and too tired to make it into a confrontation. There was one woman who tried to warn me. Her name was Patrice. She had been the Whitfield Company's office manager for 11 years, before she left to start her own bookkeeping business. She and I ran into each other at a garden center 3 months before my due date. And she recognized me from a company event. We talked for 20 minutes between the hydrangeas. Just before she left, she looked at me with the particular kindness of someone who has already survived something and said Sandra Whitfield does not share what she considers hers. Be careful about how much of yourself you give that woman to hold. I thought Patrice was being dramatic. I was wrong about a lot of things that year. My daughter was born on a Tuesday in February. We named her Rose. She had Daniel's dark hair and my stubbornness, and she was the most perfect thing I'd ever seen in my life. For about 3 weeks, everything was suspended in the particular grace that comes right after a baby arrives. When even difficult people soften and even complicated situations seem manageable, then Sandra began her campaign in earnest. It started with the return-to-work conversation. I had been doing part-time bookkeeping and administrative contract work from home, my own clients. My own schedule. Money that was mine, independent of Daniel's salary or the Whitfield Company. Sandra sat down with me when Rose was 4 weeks old and explained, with the patience of someone explaining something obvious to someone slow, that it would be better for everyone if I focused on Rose for the first year, that Daniel's income was more than sufficient, that my little freelance work was admirable, a nice hobby, but that Rose needed her mother present and not distracted. I said I would think about it. Sandra called my 2 largest clients the following week. I discovered this 3 weeks later when one of them apologized for having to let me go and mentioned, with obvious discomfort, that he had received a call from someone at Whitfield Grounds, recommending a different bookkeeping service. He thought I had referred them. I had not referred anyone. I confronted Daniel. He said he was sure his mother had not meant to interfere. He said maybe it was a misunderstanding. He said perhaps this was a sign that I should take the break she was suggesting. He said all of this in a tone that was genuinely kind and completely useless. I lost 2 more clients in the following month. I could not prove it was Sandra both times. But I knew, by the time Rose was 3 months old, I had no clients, no income, and a creeping awareness that I had been maneuvered into a position of total financial dependence, so gradually that I had not felt it happening. I had a college fund account I had opened before the wedding with my own savings. I checked it and found that the automatic contributions I had set up had been stopped. Daniel had mentioned wanting to consolidate our accounts, and I had agreed without understanding what that meant in practice. I applied for a bookkeeping position at a small accounting firm in Nashville. I got to the second interview. Then Daniel came home one evening looking uncomfortable and said his mother had heard I was job hunting. He did not explain how, and that she was concerned about Rose's care arrangements, and that she thought it would be better discussed as a family. The family discussion happened at Sunday dinner at the Brentwood house. Sandra ran it like a board meeting. She presented reasons I should remain home, had figures about childcare costs and commute times, and at one point referred to my desire to work as a phase that a lot of new mothers go through. My husband nodded at intervals. My father-in-law, a quiet man named Gerald, who I had always liked, stared at his plate. I said almost nothing. I was too angry to speak without shaking. And I did not want to shake in front of Sandra Whitfield. I got the job anyway. I accepted the offer by email on a Monday morning and told Daniel that evening. He went quiet in the way that meant he would be calling his mother within the hour. I had learned to read the silence by then. Sandra appeared at our house the following Saturday morning. She brought pastries. She was perfectly pleasant. She said she wanted to talk about childcare for Rose. That she had some ideas. That she only wanted what was best for everyone. Over 2 hours and a pot of coffee, she systematically dismantled every arrangement I had made. The daycare I had chosen was too far from Daniel's office. The backup plan I had set up with a neighbor was not reliable. She had a better option, a woman she knew, whose schedule aligned perfectly, whose references Sandra would handle. She had already spoken to this woman. The conversation was so smooth, so reasonable, so full of the language of helpfulness, that I only understood what had happened after she left. She had replaced every piece of my plan with one of hers. Rose would be cared for by someone Sandra had chosen. I would be dependent on Sandra's network for my own child's care. If I stepped out of line, Sandra could remove that care at any moment and leave me without options. I started the job anyway. For 3 weeks it was fine. Then the woman Sandra had arranged began calling out sick on the days Sandra apparently knew I had important deadlines. I would arrive at the Whitfield woman's house to drop off Rose and find a note on the door. I missed 2 meetings in my first month. My supervisor was patient but watching. I was running out of options and I knew it. It was Daniel who delivered the final blow, though I do not think he understood what he was doing. We were in the kitchen on a Wednesday evening. Rose was asleep. He sat down across from me and said that he had been thinking that his mother had raised some concerns. That maybe it would be better for our marriage and for Rose if I stepped back from the job for now. He said we could revisit it when Rose was older. He said his mother had offered to help us find something more flexible down the road. Something that worked around the family's needs. He said the family's needs and meant his mother's schedule. I asked him directly whose decision this was. He said it was something they had discussed together. Him and his mother. Because they both wanted what was right for our family. I sat with that sentence for a long moment. Him and his mother. Together. About my job. Without me in the room. I asked him when he had stopped seeing me as someone whose opinion mattered in my own life. He said I was being dramatic. I packed a bag that night. Not everything Rose was asleep, and I could not carry everything and carry her. And I was not leaving without my daughter. I took what I could, her diaper bag. 2 days of clothes for both of us. Mes laptop. The folder of documents I had started keeping when I first began to understand what was happening, account statements. Emails. The name of the accounting firm that had hired me. Patrice's business card from the garden center. I had $43 in cash in my wallet. My personal bank account had been absorbed into our joint account months earlier, and I did not know the PIN Daniel had set. I drove to the church 2 blocks from my parents' house in Clarksville, because I knew the parking lot had lights and a security camera, and I did not want to bring whatever this was to my parents' door at 11 o'clock at night without understanding it first. I sat in that parking lot with Rose sleeping in her car seat and I made a list of what I had. A laptop. A skill I was good at numbers. Had always been good at numbers. Had caught 3 significant billing errors in my first 3 weeks at the job, before Sandra's interference had cost me the position. A folder of documents. A business card. I called Patrice the next morning, at 7 a.m. She answered on the second ring. I told her she had been right. She said she knew. And she was sorry. And she asked me where I was. 2 hours later, she met me in that parking lot with coffee, and a name, a woman named Deborah who ran a small CPA firm out of East Nashville, and who, according to Patrice, had a particular appreciation for people who had been underestimated. I called Deborah from the parking lot. She asked me to come in that afternoon. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. I brought Rose in her car seat and apologized twice for the noise. Deborah waved the apologies away and talked to me like I was a professional. She was deciding whether to hire. Which I was. She asked me to walk her through a set of financials she pulled from a filing cabinet, a test. I understood. Though she did not call it that. I found an error in the depreciation schedule within 4 minutes. She offered me a position before I left the building. $41,000 a year. Health insurance. Hours that could flex for childcare. I accepted before I reached the parking lot. Finding a place to live with $43 and a newborn is exactly as difficult as it sounds. I called my parents that evening and told them what had happened in the most honest version I could manage. My mother cried. My father went quiet in the way that meant he was thinking rather than shutting down. They offered me my childhood bedroom. I knew it was temporary, and I took it anyway because Rose deserved a crib instead of a car seat. I filed for divorce 6 weeks after leaving. Daniel called twice before having his mother call, which told me everything about where his loyalty lived. Sandra left a voicemail that was so carefully worded, it could not be used against her in any legal proceeding. I saved it anyway. The divorce took 8 months. Sandra arranged for Daniel to have the better attorney. I used a lawyer who was 3 years out of law school and hungry in the way that good lawyers are when they have something to prove. Her name was Kim. And she cost me less than a month of Deborah's salary and worked harder than anyone I had witnessed in a legal context. We got joint custody, regular child support, and my right to relocate within the state of Tennessee. That last one was not in Sandra's original plan. I know, because her attorney fought it for 6 weeks and lost. I moved to Nashville 11 months after leaving that church parking lot. Rose and I took a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that was close enough to Deborah's office that I could walk when the weather allowed. The apartment was small, and the walls needed paint, and the kitchen had 1 working burner for the first 3 weeks before the landlord fixed it. And I loved it with a fierceness that surprised me. It was mine. Every decision in that apartment was mine. The furniture I chose, the hours I kept, the food in the refrigerator mine. Deborah turned out to be the person Patrice had described, someone who recognized capability and refused to let it go to waste. Within 6 months, she had given me more responsibility than my title suggested. Within a year, I was managing 3 of her largest accounts. Within 18 months, she had made me a junior partner, which was not a title she had invented before I arrived. She told me later that she had spent 12 years building that firm and never found someone she trusted with the whole picture. She said she knew within 4 minutes of that first meeting that I could see the whole picture. I started studying for the CPA exam 9 months into the job. I studied in the hour after Rose went to sleep, and in the 30 minutes before she woke up, and on the weekends she spent with Daniel, I studied for 6 hours straight, with the kind of focus that only comes when you understand exactly what is at stake. I passed all 4 sections in 14 months. Deborah made me a full partner the week after my results came in. By the time Rose was 3, I was making more money than Daniel. I know, because he mentioned it once in a bitter text exchange about the child support calculation. And I felt something I had to sit with carefully before I let myself act on it. Not pride exactly, more like the solid click of a lock opening into a door I had not been sure I would ever reach. I was not building to impress Sandra Whitfield. I want to be clear about that. I was building because Rose needed someone who could not be moved. And because I had looked at $43 in a church parking lot and decided that number was a beginning rather than an ending. Sandra Whitfield was not the reason I worked. She was proof that I had been right to. Year 3 was when I started my own firm. Deborah knew it was coming before I told her. She said she had been watching me outgrow the partnership for a year. She bought me lunch and told me she expected a referral pipeline, and that if I ever hired someone half as capable as she thought I was, I should consider it a success. I walked out of that lunch and called a commercial real estate broker I had met through one of Deborah's clients. And by the end of the week, I had signed a lease on 400 square feet in a building on Charlotte Avenue, Whitfield Financial Advisory. I kept my married name because I had earned it differently than Sandra imagined, and because Rose carried it, and I was not going to ask my daughter to have a different last name than mine. The name meant something new now. It meant me. The first year was brutally hard. I had 6 clients, 2 of whom I kept from Deborah's roster with her blessing, and 4 I had built through networking events and referrals and the kind of relentless follow-through that makes people remember you. I worked nights. Rose was with Daniel, and early mornings she was with me. And somewhere in the intersection of those 2 schedules, I built something that began to have a shape. By year 2, I had hired an associate. By year 3, I had 3 employees and a client list that included 2 of the largest privately held companies in Davidson County. A regional business publication ran a brief profile of me under the heading Ones to Watch. I kept the clipping not on my wall but in a drawer, next to the $43 receipt I had kept from a gas station in Clarksville from the night I left. Sandra's company, meanwhile, was struggling. I heard this through the peripheral network that Nashville's business community creates. Someone would mention Whitfield grounds at an event, or a mutual contact would share something in passing. The landscaping market had consolidated in Middle Tennessee, and Sandra had not adapted her pricing structure in time. 2 large municipal contracts she had relied on for a decade went to a competitor who had modernized their equipment fleet. Daniel, I knew from what Rose sometimes mentioned, was spending more time at the main office, which meant Sandra was pulling him in to manage a situation she could not manage alone. I noted all of this. I did not act on any of it. Information has value when you hold it, and no value the moment you spend it on emotion. Rose was 6, the autumn I moved into the 14th floor office. She came with me to the space on a Saturday before the furniture arrived, and she ran from one end of the empty room to the other with her arms out. And I stood at the window looking at the city and thought about the church parking lot and the $43 and everything that had happened in the 5 years between. Sandra called my firm 3 weeks after we opened that office. Not me directly, she called the main line and asked to speak with the owner. And my associate told her I was in a meeting. And Sandra left her name and said she would call again. She called again twice before my associate told me who was calling. I told her to schedule an appointment. Sandra Whitfield walked into my office on a Tuesday morning, looking smaller than I remembered. Not less controlled. Sandra was never anything less than controlled, but smaller. The way that people who have been accustomed to filling a room sometimes look when the room has grown beyond their reach. She was dressed beautifully. She looked at everything in my office once, quickly, and then she looked at me. And something moved across her face that I recognized as recalibration. I let her sit. I did not offer coffee. I waited. She came with a proposal. Whitfield grounds needed financial restructuring. She said this with the particular precision of someone who has rehearsed a difficult sentence until the emotion is gone from it. They had a cash flow problem, a pricing structure that needed rebuilding, 2 contracts they were at risk of losing. She had heard about my firm through people she respected. She was prepared to pay my rates. I looked at her for a long moment. She held the look without flinching. She had always been good at that. I said, before we discuss your business, I want to discuss something else. She waited. I told her that I knew, with specificity, what she had done. Not the general shape of it, I knew the details. I named the client she had called when Rose was 3 months old. I named the child care woman whose sick days had been coordinated. I described the Sunday dinner as I had experienced it, including the sentence, a phase that a lot of new mothers go through, which I had written down in a notebook that same evening. I told her about the joint account PIN, and the automatic savings contributions, and the attorney she had arranged for Daniel. She was very still while I spoke. I said, I am not telling you this because I want an apology. I am telling you because I want you to understand that I know, and I want you to understand that I built everything in this office in spite of what you did. Not because of what you gave me. Sandra looked at her hands for a moment. Then she looked up. She said, I thought you would leave on your own. I thought you were not built for Daniel's life. I thought I was protecting my son. I said you were protecting your plan. She did not deny it. I asked her if she understood what she had cost me. Not in money. Money I had rebuilt and surpassed. In time. In the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from being systematically dismantled by someone who smiles while they do it. She said she understood more than she had when she started I believed her. Partially. I believed she understood the outcome. I was not sure she fully understood the process. I took her case. I want to be honest about why. Not because I forgave her, I had not, and I was not certain I would. Not because I needed the business. Though the Whitfield Grounds account was substantial. I took it because Rose was 6 years old, and Daniel was Rose's father, and Whitfield Grounds was the company that paid Daniel's salary. And I had built everything I had in order to protect my daughter from instability. And that protection did not stop being important just because I was angry at the person who needed my help. I charged Sandra full rate. I did not offer a discount, and she did not ask for one. She was smarter than to ask. The restructuring took 14 months. It was some of the most technically demanding work my firm had done. Sandra came to every meeting fully prepared. Her numbers organized. Her questions intelligent. I found, over those 14 months, that she was formidable in the way that I was formidable all the way down. Without softness at the center. I did not like her. I respected her in the clinical way you respect something dangerous that is currently pointed in the right direction. On the day we closed, the last phase of the restructuring Whitfield Grounds had stabilized. The municipal contract had been retained. The pricing structure was holding. Sandra arrived to the meeting with a folder she set on the conference table between us. Inside were documents. I recognized my original client list from the contracts she had ended. Letters on Whitfield stationery from 6 years ago. Sent to my former clients. Her handwriting at the bottom of 2 of them. She had kept copies. She had brought them to me. She said, these belong to you. I kept them because I thought I might need them someday for legal reasons. I am giving them to you because you should have them. I looked at the documents. I looked at her. I said, why? She said, because my granddaughter is going to know who her mother is. And I would like her to know who her grandmother is as well. That will not be possible if I spend the rest of my life pretending I did not do what I did. I put the documents in my own folder. I did not tell her we were square. I did not tell her I forgave her. I told her the work was complete and my firm's invoice was attached to the final report. She nodded. She stood. At the door she paused and said, without turning around, that she had misjudged me. She said she had looked at a girl with no family money and no connections and decided that meant no foundation. She said she understood now that she had had it exactly backwards. She left. I sat in my conference room for a long time, after. I thought about the church parking lot and the $43 and Patrice in the garden center with her quiet warning that I had not taken seriously enough. I thought about Deborah asking me to walk through a set of financials, and the 4 minutes it had taken me to find the error. I thought about Rose running across an empty office with her arms out, and the particular feeling of standing at a window in a building that had my name on the lease, and knowing that no one could revoke it. I thought about what Sandra had said, that she had looked at a girl with no foundation, and been wrong about what she was looking at. She had not been looking at a girl without a foundation. She had been looking at a girl who was still building one. Those are not the same thing. People like Sandra Whitfield spend so much time protecting what they have built, that they forget what it looked like before it was built. They forget that foundations are made before anyone can see them. That the most important work happens underground. Rose asked me once, a few years later, why Grandma Sandra was different around me than around other people. She said Sandra seemed careful. I told her that careful was a reasonable way to feel around someone who knows you completely and has chosen to keep showing up anyway. Rose thought about that for a while. Then she said, "Is that forgiveness?" I told her it was something better than forgiveness. It was power used quietly. It was the choice to build instead of burn, made by someone who had enough in her account to afford either option. I told her that when you have built something real, truly real, with your own hands, from $43 in a parking lot and a business card from a woman in a garden center, no one can take it from you. And no one's opinion of you, however early and however wrong, gets to be the last word on who you become. That is the last word. And it belongs to you.